Today on Beyond Camp, we dive into building a life we love. With so many of our lives in turmoil right now, in one way or another, some can see it as the perfect time to rebuild. We dive into this topic with Ruby Compton, camp pro and facilitator extraordinaire, as she shares with us how she's building her business and career around her life, instead of the other way around. Join us as we discuss finding the courage to take a different path and how she stays true to herself and her values. Whether you're planning on starting your own business or just want to explore the path less traveled, we are certain there's something in this conversation for you. Welcome to Beyond Camp, where we explore the intersection of camp in our lives. For too long, camp professionals have referred to camp as being in a bubble, and we are here to burst that bubble. We know that camp intersects with every aspect of our lives, and we're excited to delve into those. We are your hosts, Rachel Kent. My pronouns are she, her.
And I'm Cassie Bloy. My pronouns are also she, her.
And we're here to go beyond camp with you. As a reminder, please subscribe to this podcast wherever you find your favorite podcasts, and be sure to check out the show notes at gocamp.pro/beyondcamp. Now, let's get started. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Ruby Compton, who spent over 15 years working in the outdoor industry in summer camp, environmental education, and management. She's now the Chief Exploration Officer at Ruby Outdoors. The outdoors have always been a place of respite and comfort for Ruby, and as she's progressed through her career, she's seen the importance of balance, professionalism, and prioritizing time to watch the sunrises and sunsets on a regular basis, which makes her the perfect guest for this episode today. Cassie and I have both spent time with Ruby at the Women in Camp Summit, which she's co-founded, and you might recognize her voice from Camp Code, the podcast which she co-hosts. Welcome, Ruby. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you so much. It's really, truly an honor, and I'm excited to chat further with you all today.
As we were discussing this episode and getting ready to dive in, I immediately thought of Ruby. I attended one of her Taco Tuesdays, where you can sit down and have a chat with Ruby about anything that's on your mind. And something that really resonated with me was you said that you wanted to build a career around the life that you wanted versus the other way around. So I'm so excited to have you here as we dive into building the life that we love. And I'm curious, because you did start working in camp. What drew you to trying to work full-time in camping?
Totally by accident. I was not the plan by any means. My undergraduate degree is in the music business, and I had worked at a summer camp throughout college. And right when I graduated from college was when the 2007-2008 recession hit. And so camp became a stable force of work in the way that my career was not. And so I just kept going back. And when you do well at camp and, show up, you get rewarded for that. So down the line, ended up working at an outdoor education program during the school years, and then a camp administrator during the summer. And then that led to a full-time position later on here in North Carolina.
Nice. And how long did you work full-time for?
So I was full-time for 4 years at a private camp in Western North Carolina called Green River Preserve. And then when I left that position, I moved into an outdoor education job here in Western North Carolina that actually had similar folks on the board and kind of ran in the same circles, but then shifted to school year programming. Did that for about a year and a half, and then left that job to start my own company.
Cool. Right on. That's really fascinating that you said camp was the stable place of work, because for so many of us, that's not true.
So true. So true. Yeah. And it was great because we had a pretty decent retreats and like weekend business. So I was working at camp while I was in college, not only during the summers, but it was nearby to where I went to university. So I was able to pop over and help out and see some of the off-season life, which was cool. Got to know some of the directors, and they were certainly pivotal leaders in my life.
That's awesome.
That's amazing, Ruby. I'm really like the different transitions you've had and gone through. What was that decision process to transition away from full-time camp like for you?
For sure. It was one of the toughest decisions I've made because, as you all have talked about in this podcast, my identity was wrapped up in being a camp director. Like, I have this very specific memory of being at an AEE conference, an Association of Experiential Ed conference in Chattanooga. It was like my first or second year being a full-time camp director. And we did this session about identity, and it was run by, I believe, some folks from Outward Bound, and really cool session where they got you talking about things like race and privilege and just how you were raised and what you account for as part of your identity. And in a 2-hour session,
Amazing.
we're doing this, right? It was unbelievable. And the thing that I wrote down as kind of my identifying feature, or like the thing I wanted to dig into, was I am a camp director. And so I remember when I started thinking about leaving camp, that moment of like, I don't even know where on Craigslist, like what section do I look under for jobs? I don't even, what do I want to do? And it was, I had no idea. And I had done some other, side work and worked as a server here and there. But most of the work I had was in camp or with youth. And so that moment of staring at the screen going, I don't even know what link to click on, I remember being really interesting for me.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that right now. Like Googling recreation, youth, program.
Yeah,
like
totally.
Just figuring out those terms and what it is. It's hard. So what gave you the confidence and courage to go out there and do it?
Yeah. So I like 100%, I can say that knowing the folks with Go Camp Pro, like having gotten connected with Travis and Beth early on in my full-time career was huge. They are connectors. They are includers. They are people that when you finally meet them at a conference, they're like, yeah, come to dinner with us, right? And so they gave me a lot of confidence and a lot of support. And I truly never would have gone out on my own, or wouldn't have gone out on my own right now had it not been for the work that I had done with them and the places that they put me. I think there is also, having worked with a handful of entrepreneurs, both worked underneath them and alongside them, and however that may look, there's a little bit of nuttiness to people who are like, I'm gonna start my own business. Like, you have to have a little bit of that just kooky, like, I'm just gonna throw some of the caution to the wind and take this risk because I'm gonna do it. And it's brave or stupid, I don't know. People said both things to me along the way, and I think they go hand in hand. And but the appeal of getting to deal with problems that are my own to sort out, that I wasn't always working through somebody else's problems, that the problems that were handed down to me at work. But like, if I choose to go work at a restaurant part-time to pay my bills, like, that is my choice and it's going towards my dream. And that really motivated me. And I recognize that doesn't motivate everybody, but it really, really motivated me. And when there were financial hardships along the way, like, I was not even 6 months into having my own business and having left my full-time job, and the pipes busted in my house and I had to replace literally all the plumbing in my house, which was not cheap. And like, you have this moment of, you're like, what am I doing? But it was worth it to go fight it out and figure it out because I wanted to create the life I wanted to have.
That's really cool. And I like that you mentioned Travis and Beth. I mean, Cassie and I are here because we were on a Camp Mavericks call. We were both like, wow, we have no idea what we're doing. We're just kind of like these lost little ducks swimming about the lake. And Travis was like, all right, come on in, let's do a podcast.
Yeah.
So I think that mentorship piece is really important. I want to dive into that for a second. Do you have any advice for folks who don't have that connection yet, how they can seek that out?
Oh, like finding other mentors and people to bring you in.
Yeah.
I think, it's hard, but I think just asking the question, like, will you be my mentor? I think about the book, like, are you my mother? But finding folks who are doing what you want to be doing, even if it's not exact, right? But somebody who is managing people really well, that's somebody I want to sit down and have a conversation with, because regardless of if they're managing people in manufacturing or if they're managing people in retail, like, if they're managing people well, there is something to be gained and learned from that person. And so I think thinking through, what is it that you see people do that you go, I want that. And it's not even asking them, how do I get what you have? It's asking them, tell me your story. And by hearing other people's journeys and stories, that's where I've gained a lot of insight on, okay, the path I'm taking, do I want more of what they have? And you get the ups and downs too, right? Like, I had a conversation with a dear friend recently who was like, I think I want to do more outdoor work. And I think I want to look towards working at like Knowles or Outward Bound. And I was like, I think you need to dig in a little bit to what is that lifestyle, because I know people that do it and there's great stuff, but what you're telling me about what's really great in your life right now, a lot of that's going to get shaken up if you take that path.
Right.
So just spend some time exploring what is that lifestyle like, 360 view, what does that look like? And I think being encouraged to ask those questions to mentors and people that I admire, and people, especially who are younger than I am, who are like crushing it and getting exactly what they want and dreaming big dreams. I love talking to those people and finding out, how did you get here? Tell me about your journey.
I love that. And I love that you mentioned chatting with people outside of the camping industry. I was on a call with somebody last night, and his goal between now and some date in the fall was to have like a networking lunch or coffee, whether it be virtual or in person, with 30 people. And he set that goal. And I was like, what a cool thing to do, and just a way to like reach out to people and hear their story, which is amazing. You talked about some of the like initial uncertainty around, leaving your job, and the financial part is huge, especially the world we're in right now. How did you cope with some of that uncertainty, or did you just embrace it and dive right in?
So some of it was familiar because, and I think many listeners may resonate with this. If you've ever worked seasonal jobs, I found that, I was doing 3 months at my outdoor ed program, 3 months at camp, then 3 months back at the outdoor ed program, and 3 months at my parents' house working whatever job at the mall I could find, and I did that for most of my, mid to late 20s. And it's almost always fine. Like, I got to go to the Grand Canyon twice during that time because I could just say, yes, I can be gone for 17 days and it's fine. So many opportunities and cool stuff came about because of that. But then every few months you have that, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? and it's paralyzing. And you spend a couple days going, I need to look for more stable work, or I need to, be saving more. And I think those are some of the grounding moments where you feel the most frenzied and out of control, but they also force you to look at your values and look at the choices you're making and affirm or deny and say, you know what, I really do need a life change right now. So I think it's just having that self-awareness, right? And taking that time to reflect and sit in it and, take control of the things that you can take control of, and try to let go of the uncertainty that's there, and just really focus on what you know, what you're good at, and the path that you want to be on. And if you really focus attention into that, you're going to be able to start making steps to getting there.
Thanks so much for mentioning the piece about sometimes it doesn't go well, you do freak out, because that's been an important part of our journey with this podcast so far, is to really be vulnerable and talk about the things that sometimes aren't going well. So I appreciate you addressing that really head on for our listeners.
Sure. It's very real. and so I did, let's see, I guess it was a couple summers ago. I think it was the first summer that I was not working at camp, didn't have a full-time job, like kind of trying to live the dream and figure it out during the summer. And I was really intentional about spending a week on Instagram posting things that were very real. It was like the sink full of dirty dishes, or the fact that it is 9 a.m. and I really do not want to get out of bed. And people will dream this like, oh, you're out on your own, you must have everything perfect. And it's like, it's not everything. Everything is not perfect. It's not. It's just not. And also, it's not all terrible either. That is life. We ride the wave and there's ups and downs. And when we start thinking about other people as having the perfect life, that's when we can get into some really dangerous territory. So it was important to me to spend 7 days being like, I get sweaty when I go run, and my kitchen is disgusting right now. And that is just life. There's a ring of mold in my toilet. It makes us human. It happens, and we'll proceed on. But we also have joyful moments, and we also have sad moments. And remember that those experiences are much more complex than what you necessarily see on social media.
Yeah, social media, my goodness, it really takes us on a journey of its own entity, I believe. Especially lately, I've found it's just kind of, this comes up and that comes up, and then you see somebody's beautiful travel blog, and I'm like, you're traveling during COVID, like, what are you doing?
Yeah, right.
Right. But you always seem to me, like, from our conversations we've had at different events and such, that you're always motivated and you live like with a lot of positivity. How do you maintain and keep that consistency when there are those hard times and there are those struggles?
There's a lot of struggles that I would say a lot of folks in my world don't know about. and don't see. And I think a piece of that is I have really mixed feelings, and this is not judgment. I just recognize that in myself, there are some really mixed feelings for me when I see, especially on social media, when somebody is putting something really hard out on Facebook or Instagram. So I think about a friend I had in high school who he and his wife had a baby. They discovered while she was still in her mom's belly that she was very sick and probably not going to make it very long. And every day, this baby did eventually was born and was in the ICU. And every day they were posting these like updates and heartfelt thanks and all this stuff. And I remember thinking it was such a strange feeling that this person who now is very much on the periphery, like I haven't talked to this guy in, 15, 20 years, but I was being pulled into his story of just like immense grief and challenge and conflict. And I just remember being like, I'm so appreciative there's a way for him to reach out and their family to get the support. And also, isn't it weird that I'm getting so intimately pulled into these feelings and this experience that's really intense, and I'm very much on the periphery. And so for me personally, that was a moment where I kind of made a choice of like, I don't think that that's how I plan to process and grief. Life changes, right? But when things are really hard, I'm not sure that that's going to be the way that I put it out there for folks to see. And a lot of those harder, tougher things, like those are experienced with the very close friends. And that's how I process and deal with it. And shoot, like 2019, I mean, it was a dumpster fire year for me, 100%, like lost a long-term relationship that I'd been in. My dog passed away. Like it was a rough year. And it was one of those years where you're like, I'm okay. Like I'm finally feeling better. I'm finally feeling like getting out of bed. And then it was like something else would happen and just like sucker punch and knock me down. And it was surprising to me, the folks that came along and like picked me up and walked alongside me and walked me through that journey and did a lot of reading and reflection. So I think for me, it's a much tighter inner circle that I let in on that stuff. And also sometimes it's just the folks that happen to be there when the moment is happening. So, yeah.
So to go with that, this is like a personal struggle I've had with a conversation with a couple friends. How do you find that tight inner circle and those friends when we're so attached to camp and so many of our friends are camp?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, great question. I mean, one thing, like I said, is it's been the people that have been there. So, many of you that have heard me talk on podcasts or on calls, like, that I work for a couple of restaurants part-time. And last summer when I was having this dumpster fire year, it was me coming to work and one of my coworkers who is kind of mom age, like could be my mom. And she looked at me and she was like, "How are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm fine." And she was like, "No, you're not." and I just started sobbing and she hugged me. Remember we could do that hugging? Oh, so nice. And it was just this moment of like, okay, you're going to care for me and love for me. And so sometimes it's not necessarily the people you want it to be, or you are necessarily choosing or saying like, I want it to be this person, but sometimes it's just the person that's there and that cares. I think other times it is that you offer a little like trust offering and you kind of go, can I trust you with this? Can I be vulnerable? Can I tell you this thing? And I've gone so far as to ask people that, like, I have some tough stuff going on. Are you willing to walk alongside me during this? Or listen, I just need someone to listen right now. Fortunately, camp people, we talk that language. So that's not so weird. Like if one of you all said that to me, I'd be like, yeah, cool, let's do it. Whereas if you go to any of your other friends who aren't camp, they may not understand that language. But I think it's so cool how our experiences in camp that allow us to be vulnerable and allow us to put trust into folks and to teach other people how to trust other people, that we can bring that to the rest of the world when we are struggling to find those supports that we need.
I really like what you said about boundaries. We talked about this a couple episodes previous about this like need that when we're like reaching out, we need to say like what it is we need and sort of ask that permission first, that we respect that person's boundaries and then they also respect ours. I think that's remarkably important and often so underrated and such an easy thing to do. People just don't think about it, but it's just a simple like, hey, this is what I need right now. Can you give it to me? And if not, like no hard feelings, I can find somebody else who can.
For sure. And so I've been thinking a lot about boundaries. Like it is the word of the year for me because I definitely struggle with that. I'm really bad about giving yeses when I need to give intentional yeses and need to give more no's on the front end. But I also listen a lot to the Mark Groves podcast, and he talks about boundaries in relationships. And something that he said that is like so resonated with me was this idea of when we meet someone who gives us firm boundaries, like that is very attractive because you're like, oh, you're gonna like you're not just gonna take care of me, like you're gonna keep yourself safe, which helps me know that you're gonna keep me safe too. And so being able to reinforce boundaries and share them, like I think when you say this is a boundary that I have, that is actually, it's not building walls, as he says, it's opening a door, right? It's saying, this is how I want you to interact with me. This is my invitation for how you can come into my life. And this is how the invitation for how you leave my life. But all around, like boundaries are good things. They are not these like fences and walls that we're building.
Exactly. And I think that they help us guide us through this like tumultuous time as well. And we have to set those boundaries with social media, with the news, etc. Today I had a small moment of pride where I was like, I can't be on Twitter anymore. I just can't. Like I can't. School reopening plans are really big here in Ontario right now in Canada.
Yeah.
And I was like, I can't read any more arguments about this. Like I can't pick a side. And I just closed it off. And that was my like small victory of the day with boundaries was setting that one. I think it's, yeah, super important. I know that you're really passionate about them. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, boundaries are so big. I've been setting my own by just removing myself from family at certain times this week. Mm-hmm. Just, you know what? I need 15-minute break right now. And just disappearing from the group.
Yeah. And recognizing that is so key, right? So often, and I'll speak a little bit to the way that women are trained specifically is this idea of that our boundaries are much more flexible than males. And that is a society culture thing that is taught, that it's okay for a guy to say, no, I don't want to do that, but it's not okay for a lady to say that. And there's a problem there. And, and it's that classic leadership question of, a guy who's aggressive or even assertive is a great leader. And a woman who does that is, a big old jerk. And it's like, no. We have to reprogram some of that. And it's okay it is caring to establish boundaries. It is kind to establish boundaries. And it's not just about kindness to other people. It is also a kindness to yourself.
Mm-hmm. And I really like that concept of like the language we use and how its society sits as males versus females. And I think that might be a topic for us later on.
Yeah, totally. Camp has played a pivotal role in the lives of many, and for the first time, camp pros are faced with a very different summer. The American Camp Association of Illinois is dedicated to supporting the camp professional and helping them navigate an uncommon summer.
They have an entire section on their website dedicated to camps and responding to coronavirus. This includes information for camper families as well as camp professionals. Hear from ACA Illinois Executive Director about camp this summer.
For camp professionals, the ACA Illinois website is full of great resources, including the American Camp Association's Camp Operations Guide for Summer 2020, which is created by a panel of experts, and it can be viewed by the chapter or downloaded in its entirety.
ACAIL.org also has links to the Department of Public Health, the CDC guidelines, the state response page, and several other helpful links. Camp pros don't want to miss out on this wealth of information.
And it doesn't stop there. The ACA of Illinois has provided free webinars to assist their members and non-members alike across the country and the globe. Check out the upcoming webinars and listen to recordings of previous webinars all summer long.
But we're going to just change direction a little bit here.
For sure.
Going from like frontline staff to admin and kind of a variety of different spots within camp and then moving out of camp. What's kind of the growth you've seen in your professional career? How has that kind of trajectory gone for you, and like where are you finding the things to help you grow or the tools to help you grow?
Sure. So a long time ago, I identified that I love learning. I really love learning. Maybe an unhealthy love of learning. The first time that I was working in outdoor ed, and I remember like our first day of training and learning all these plants, and I was like, this is amazing. I never want to have a job where I'm not constantly learning. And I've backed off of that a little bit, but the learning isn't always facts, right? Sometimes learning is about social interactions and how to, like, that's why I love being a manager, is learning how I need to manage Rachel and how that may be different from how I manage Cassie, right? Like if y'all were my employees, and understanding that and being able to navigate that and still be a fair and equitable leader, for everybody feels that way, but also everybody's getting their needs met, to the degree and the boundaries that I can set and do in that place. So I think having that motivation to just keep learning has definitely led me to all kinds of new and interesting things. I mean, many folks know, because I just posted about it on social media, I just bought a raft, and like, I'm so excited about it. And if you had told me 5 years I was going to buy a raft and own a raft, I would be like, no, there's no way. That's terrifying. There's no way I would do that. And it's that I said yes to going on a Grand Canyon trip several years ago, that I worked with folks who were boaters, and then they were like, well, you have a lot of the gear. Why don't you just buy a kayak? And I did. And I've like stepped out on that and been okay with like sucking at stuff sometimes. Like it's okay to not be great at something. And then finally was like, I think it'd be really cool to go to raft guide school. And I have some camps that are asking me to maybe be able to jump in and help out that way. So I'll go give it a try. And I love learning from great teachers too. That's something else that I really, really enjoy. And that great teacher can be a wilderness medicine educator, or it can be a naturalist, or it can be somebody teaching very dry, boring stuff. But if they're teaching it well, it makes that learning so fun. So I think it's really my passion and drive for learning that has led me to being in lots of different rooms, lots of different spaces. And then teaching is the best way to learn, right? So as soon as I learn something, I'm like, I want to turn around and teach this to people, which has led me to speaking at conferences and being on podcasts and, trying to figure out how to use social media to teach folks versus just giving an insight into my life, which is great too. And I think all of those pieces combined have led me to where I am, but just always wanting to learn.
That's so important. I know that you love podcasts and I love reading articles. During quarantine, it's come to my attention that apparently one of my more annoying traits is to constantly be like, oh, I was reading this article. And apparently the rest of the world is not as keen on me sharing every article that's come across my desk. But
yes,
I love your articles.
Yes, so I think that learning is great. Have there been certain moments that like really stand out to you as being like pivotal in your growth, either in shifting where you wanted to go or just like really helped you grow exponentially compared to other things?
For sure. I mean, one that really sticks out, I said already earlier, this idea of like life is riding the wave. And I was in a space where I was pretty sure I was wanting to lean towards leaving full-time camp. And I was at an ACA conference, and I found a way to, like, every person that I saw get up on stage and make announcements, they're like on the conference committee, whatever else. I found a way to be standing next to them at some point at the conference and have a conversation with them, or sitting next to them at a meal, or whatever it might be. I target in on that stuff, and I'm like, I'm going to get to know that person. Here it comes. And I remember sitting down and talking with one particular camp director, who's a long time camp director and has been at his current camp, 15 years or so. And I said, how do you do it? I am burned out. I'm tired, exhausted. Like, how do you stay in it this long? And he said, you just got to ride the wave. There's going to be peaks and valleys, and that's just part of it. And you just have to ride the wave. And I remember coming out of that being like, all right, I'm going to ride the wave. And I rode the wave of camp for, another year or so. But it was such an important reminder of there are going to be peaks and valleys. And that in the end, like, the peaks are a thing, the valleys are a thing, but really we spend most of our time in the flow, right? Like, it's not necessarily the giant rapid. It's not necessarily the moment when your raft flips and you're upside down. It's like a lot of the flat water and the little wave trains that happen that are fun. And that was huge, being able to accept that. And I heard this on a podcast. That's what I always say. I was listening to a podcast. But this idea of the lower your lows, the greater the capacity for your highs. And that really framed my, summer 2019 that was terrible. Was like, man, all these lows, I'm also having these days of just like exponential joy, like levels of joy that I didn't even know I could reach. So that was a big one. Another big one was I think about each of the days that I decided to leave the job where I was. And each of those days, there was a moment where it was like, it's time for me to move on from here. I remember when my camp director at the Y camp I worked for said, hey, will you look at this thing for me? And it was his application to become the executive director at another job. And I went, if he leaves, I'm going to leave, because I really enjoy working for him, and he's the glue that holds this team together. It was going back to my outdoor ed job after having spent the summer at Green River, and they were talking to me about becoming the program director. And I was like, I'm not interested. And I went back, and there were changes that were happening. Our maintenance guy walked up and said, I'm not going to be here anymore. I'm changing jobs. And I was like, oh, it may be time for me to consider other opportunities, And in my most recent job to start my own company, it was like, of all things, we started our master class for Camp Code, and we did our designing staff training class. And I was like, oh my gosh, people want to pay to hear what I have to say. That's amazing. Like, maybe I could do this, And there were some other things that lined up, but it was just these little moments where you go, oh, things could be different. And these assumptions I was making may actually not be so true.
I love that. I love so much about what you just said. The wave analogy, I love a good analogy and metaphor. I'm really big into the roller coaster right now. And I hate roller coasters, which explains my relationship to this pandemic. But I love the wave analogy, and that's so important that we just have to go with it right now, because we just can't change all of those things. And that's never been more true, I think, than during this time of uncertainty. And then I also love what you said when you were talking about like your reasons for moving jobs, because you were like, wait, this thing that I love about it is changing, and it's time for me to like change paths myself. So when you're looking at building your own business, how do you check in with yourself to ensure that what you're creating still aligns with your values and what you wanted, like that you're not being, pushed off into another direction by a like social media or by like an outside source?
Totally. I've had to pay a lot of attention to what am I excited about doing? And it's easy when you start a company to be like, wherever the money is, that's what I'm going to do. And that serves no one. Just quite frankly, it serves no one. And there have been projects that I really like the people, but the work itself is just not work that I'm excited about doing or passionate about doing. And then my quality of work definitely suffers. And I've learned that trial and error and still learning, and to give the grace of that can change. What I loved doing even 5 years ago, even 2 years ago, when I launched this business, that has shifted and adjusted. And that's okay. Give yourself grace to change your mind. That's healthy. It's normal. It's part of growing up. It's part of learning. And it's totally okay to see something and go, I thought it was going to be this, but now it's going to be this. I think another thing that's happened is just being challenged. So I was fortunate to spend some time with Jim Kane I guess it was a couple years ago during conference season, and we were going to the same conferences and on the same flights. And he's somebody I've been able to get to know through just speaking at conferences and whatnot. And I was telling him about this thing that I'm working on and that thing I'm working on. And he was like, Ruby, you're doing too much. Just pick one and do it. And just do that. Because if you do too much, people get confused. And the marketer in me knows, yes, that is smart marketing advice. And that's totally true. But what he rubbed up against was, but that's not the way I want to do this. I am not picking out one thing that I'm going to be forever. I'm not going to be the team building guru. That's you. Great. Take it, Jim. Do it. You're great at it. But for me, that does not fuel me. And what I'm doing right now in my business may look really different in 10 years. And that's what I want. I want it to be that way because needs are going to change. The world is fundamentally changing right now. And so being able to be flexible and move and change and be useful, that is really central and core to what I do.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think that that's important. And I think the pandemic has taught a lot of us that things are going to change, and that it's okay to accept that change, and also to have like external life events realize that things are going to change. For me, this is not super work related, but we were going to buy a condo before this, and this happened, and then we were like, nope, you know what? We want to move like a couple hours down the road. We want something completely different, and we've just sort of like accepted that. People are like, what changed all that? And it almost feels cheesy to me, but I'm like, nope, things change, and I'm okay with that. I think that it's really important that we accept that and we allow those outside influences as well, that we're not building these like concrete walls around ourselves to stay in these little boxes. We often leave, like with a quote unquote traditional workforce to break outside of that box, only to build our own little box to force ourselves to stay in.
So true.
Yeah, I would definitely agree as well. It's such a box that we put ourselves in, and I've been, I'm playing with going outside of that box right now as everything progresses, and I'm trying to see the pandemic as what it's given me, not what it's taken away from me as well, and to kind of, maybe look at what can provide a better work-life balance as well at the same time, because that is so hard to do at overnight camp, especially, and it's hard in life too. So how do you balance? What are some tips and tricks for helping balance work and life together?
I definitely do not have the answer. 100%, like, not the best at it.
Love it.
I'm right here, not the best at it. Yeah, let's just be real. I wish I could say like I have these routines and this planner and this productivity system, and no, I'm terrible at it. It's a skill I'm still growing.
Why do we suck at it then?
That's a great question. So let me say this piece first, and then I want to address your question, Cassie. So the first thing is, when the pandemic started, and many of you have heard me say this, but I think it's worth repeating, that the world needs camp people more than ever right now. Mm-hmm. So for everyone who is finding themselves without a job at camp or whatever, right? The world needs you. The grocery stores need you. Think about the difference between going to whatever is your neighborhood grocery store and if you've ever been to like a Trader Joe's that feels campy, right? Like somebody who worked at summer camp runs that place. And why can't more places be like camp? Oh my gosh, like we have this opportunity right now when so much is falling apart for us to say, look, we've tried some of this stuff at camp and we know it works, and it works on a larger scale. So if you're feeling this like, I don't know what my purpose is, and now I'm gonna have to try something else, like you will be rewarded when you go into other places that are not camp, because you are going to have skills that folks need right now. They need folks who can manage people who are stressed, right? We do that every time that a parent comes and drops off their kid at camp, or a kid is like, it's been 2 weeks and I haven't pooped, right? Like if you can manage that, you can deal with anything else that the world throws at you, I promise, right? That we deal on limited resources and budgets and really strict financial restrictions, right? We operate and know how to look around and go, this person has talent here. Let me move them into this space so that they can shine. And we see that potential. So the world needs us right now. And we will find our way back to camp, but the world needs camp right now and needs camp people. So like, don't let go of that. Even if you're like, oh man, okay, well, I'm not at camp anymore. You know what? You're still a camp person, and we still have an impact, and you're going to go out in the world and you're going to do great things. And how many times I've been in jobs where people are like, I don't understand why you're okay just like going in and cleaning up this raw sewage. I'm like, not the first time, right? That's an actual story that happened to me. Or like, I don't understand how you keep your cool through all of this. And I'm like, this is not that stressful. It's just not that stressful compared to other places that I've been. So please hear that. As far as like the work-life balance, I think the biggest and best thing you can do is don't get on the hamster wheel. That we let ourselves get into habits and routines and then say, oh, well, I guess that's just the way it is. And no, it's not. Like, take a step back. And that's a privileged point of view. I'll also point that out. But when you can, take the step back to look around you and think about how do I want to spend my time right now? And that is a question I asked myself a bunch when I was looking at leaving camp, was how do I want to spend my time? The things that I'm being asked to do in my job are not the things that I want to be spending my time doing. And so that's an inconsistency. That's a problem. Can I find more alignment there? And I think if you ask yourself that question pretty aggressively, I think you'll find that, yeah, you know what? My job may not be my favorite, but it gives me the resources to go play on the weekends. Or, yeah, I love my job and I love how I spend my time during that. But I also always find myself just like getting sucked into the void of Netflix. And then I spend all of my free time watching Netflix. And I don't love that. I don't love that. That's how I'm spending my time. So let me see if I can make an adjustment. This week, no Netflix, right? Whatever it might be. But ask yourself that question. How do I want to spend my time?
I love that question. I'm going to start asking myself more of that because I've been sucked into that Netflix void.
Oh, me too. 100%.
Or maybe it's more of like the Disney Plus void, but
yes. Haven't we all?
As bad. As you're talking about like spending time, what do you do for personal time? Because you've merged so much of what you like to do into what you do with your business. Mm-hmm. How do you separate work and play and find that personal time for you?
Totally. Well, I'm going to throw another river analogy at you, which is the idea of an eddy. So when you're on moving water and you're in a river or something like that, right? That you have water flowing downstream and there's a rock and the water hits that rock and goes around it. And it creates this kind of like empty space behind the rock, which is typically a space where water then kind of backfills and it creates this calm spot. And so as a boater, when you're learning how to kayak or raft or whatever, part of the skills you're learning is how to like put your boat into those eddies very intentionally. And so I think about that as those eddies, as those calm, those rest spots, those ways to like make a really tricky rapid. You can break it down and like do a little section and rest. And then look and see where you need to go next and do the next little section and rest. Like that's when you're a really good boater, is when you can put your boat where you want it to be. And so I think about that with free time, right? Like my free time, my personal time are those eddies. And here's the thing, like eddies can also, and they're really bad on the Grand Canyon. This happened to me yesterday on our rafting trip. Awesome rapids, so excited about it. We get through the first little wave and then an eddy like sucked us over to the side. So we missed the fun splashy ride down the rest of the rapid and like took this little silly sneak line that was not what I wanted to do. They will suck you in. And so just like we have to be intentional with our work, we also have to be intentional with that personal time and put ourselves in those eddies, put ourselves in that rest time, put ourselves in that personal time, and spend it the way we want to spend it. That's the key to feeling productive. It's not about the number of things that you do. Feeling productive comes from doing the things that you set out to do. So I tell camp directors all the time, like, that thing that happens where in the morning you sit down and you're like, I want to just write this email real quick to this parent. And then the phone rings and you get interrupted. And then somebody calls you down to the dining hall because the electricity is off. And then there's somebody, there's poop on the walls. There's always poop. Sorry, there's just a lot of poop talking. Let's be real. And this staffer's having an issue. And then this other parent calls you and you get to the end of the day and you've like put out 15 fires over the course of your day. But because you didn't write that one email, you go, I got nothing done today. And so when we can set that intention of, I'm going to do this thing, that's what gives us I feel like I'm in control. So set realistic to-do lists. And that for me looks like, I'm going to go on a trail run. I'm going to spend 1 day a week boating. I'm going to clean my house. That's something I really need to do right now. I think that's really key is setting those intentions on that free time. And sometimes that looks like, I'm not going to put anything on my calendar and I'm just going to do whatever comes up. And that's okay. It's totally okay. But make sure you're scheduling some of those days for yourself too.
I love that. And I love the reminder to play as well. That's the part that I'm finding I'm missing from being at camp is I love causing what I called controlled chaos, where the children are like, this is just chaotic. And I'm like, no, I have like all of this under control. But I miss that. I miss the play and the silliness of it. And I've had to really carve out time to find that and be like, it's okay to be silly and have play outside of camp. Thank you for that reminder. One of my fears in not working full-time in camp anymore is that I'm going to lose those connections to the camp community that have been really important to me. And you have stayed incredibly well connected to the camp community, even though you don't work at like a physical camp. How have you built those connections? And did you find it really challenging at first?
Great question. So I think I've been very intentional with that from the get-go, which is part of the reason I've been able to stay so connected. When I started working at Green River, I said to myself, I am not just going to know this camp family. I want to know the Western North Carolina camp family. And I'm fortunate that I live in a place that there's about 60 camps, 60 resident camps within a 2-hour radius, or 60 overnight camps within a 2-hour radius of where I live. So there's a high population, a high
That's
concentration.
wild.
Yeah, and it's great. So there's always camp people around, and I have lots of different groups of friends within the camp people. I think being involved on Summer Camp Pros, being involved on Camp Mavericks, being involved in the COVID Slack, that's led to some incredible connections. Getting involved on my local ACA planning committee for our local conference, speaking at conferences, going to conferences, like, oddly enough, I know this is going to be hard to believe, but I'm actually quite shy and grew up thinking I was an introvert, which turns out put me on a mountain by myself. And no, I'm definitely an extrovert. Did not learn that until I was about 27. But I tend to default, if there's a really strong personality in the room, like, I will step back and I will watch and listen and not fight for that. If no one's stepping up, I'll be like, all right, I need to be the leader in the room. Here we go. But knowing that about myself has been very interesting.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So it's people and relationships are very, very important to me. And it's important that folks in my life know that they're valued. It's important that folks in my life, when I think about them, know that I'm thinking about them. And it's not so that they're like, oh my gosh, Ruby's always so thoughtful, but it's just sometimes knowing that somebody else is thinking about your experience in the world goes a really long way. And so it's things like, I texted a former staff member of mine today because something that Travis said on a call that I was on with him reminded me of her. And so I just sent her a quick message and said, hey, you came across my mind today, and I'm just wondering how life is treating you. And I think taking the time to do that when that person pops in your mind can be really, really helpful for continuing to have those touch points. And don't rely on, well, I saw what they're doing on social media. Like, that's a very passive way to stay connected to what folks are doing. But do actively take that time to reach out and find out, hey, what's up? Right? Like, what's on your mind? And also draw boundaries around that too. Like, you don't have to stay super connected to all people all the time. That it's okay for relationships to be in a lull or a stasis for a little while that doesn't involve everyday contact. And we've probably all had the experience of people that you get on the phone with them and it's like you haven't not talked to them in 6 months, but you can pick right up. And I find that that's more often true than not.
Yeah, especially with camp folks, I find. And I love that intentionality you talk about. This is why camp people are so great, and why the world needs more camp people, as you say.
Yes.
So often, is that intentionality, especially where now it's so easy to like hop on Zoom calls and everything we do, but where do we find the meaning in that? And I think the intentionality behind that is really important. And I think Cass and I have both talked a lot about our social circles being really tied to camp.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of fear that comes with the idea that we're going to lose those and that we almost like won't be welcome in the camp world. I think that's sometimes a fear of mine that I've like made myself an outsider. I don't know that anybody else has given me that title, but I've told myself that, and that's a scary place to be in. And so it's good to hear that, you just have to be really intentional about those connections and keeping them there.
For sure. And recognize that the people that you have impacted in camp so far are always going to tie you to camp. Always. And I still have staff members who worked for me 10 years ago who follow me on Twitter or will reach out every once in a while. And like, I am camp to them, regardless of whether I still am working in camp.
Yeah, I think we often forget as camp leaders how many lives we've impacted and the differences that we've made there. And how we can keep those alive, and we can still, when we've had that leadership position, we can still impact those lives for years to come down the road in even like the smallest but most intentional ways.
For sure.
Excellent. I think we're at that time, everybody, to start wrapping it up today. As we talk about community and connection, it's like such a big part of our self-care as well. So our recharge station. Self-care is critical to personal wellness in the good times and the difficult times. It is also something we as camp professionals struggle with. How do you charge your batteries? What makes you feel inspired? Rachel, what do you have for us this week?
I love that we've been talking about this because, as Ruby said earlier, when she was like, I'm self-admittedly not great at this. I am the same way often, though, like work-life balance is really hard today. My partner came into the room and was like, I think you're doing too many things. And I was like, excuse me. She might be right. So for me right now, self-care is looking like working outside. So it's taking my laptop and having the chance to sit outside. I'm lucky I have a shady spot that we sometimes get better Wi-Fi out there than we do in the house. And it just helps my mental health so much to be outside, even if I'm on my computer. Ruby, you mentioned that this is an area that maybe you're still working on, but what have you been doing for self-care lately that's been helpful?
There are people in my life that every time I have a conversation with them, my cup is filled. And it's usually more about life and bigger ideas and thoughts and questions. And so it's A, recognizing and like noticing when those kind of feelings are happening, but also B, making the time to talk to those folks. And that's honestly one of the reasons that I scheduled that Taco Tuesday, those Taco Tuesday events, is like, it's really fulfilling to have conversations with people. So setting aside that time, be it, I mean, I had a 17-year-old who follows me on Instagram and was just like, I'm just excited. I listened to Camp Code and I just wanted to talk to you. This is so cool. To like people who I really admire, to friends who are like, I just wanted to like book some time to hang out with you, you know? And so again, that's that, like the reason that you all brought me on, this idea of like taking these things that I love and making that part of my work. And, but also it is totally that, like, it's not work-life balance, it's work-life integration. But conversations through and through.
I like that, work-life integration. How can we make it all work together?
For sure.
So for me, it's to read a book that you've always wanted to read and never had the time to read. And do that in the version that you can digest, whether that's a book from the library, buying it from the store, an audiobook, or a digital version of some sort. But sit down, walk, enjoy it with something that you will want to eat and a cup of something you want to drink. Do it how you do you. So we want to thank you for joining us beyond camp. We hope that you are able to connect and reflect with us as we journey beyond the property lines and bring camp with us. As we wrap up, we want you to be able to reach out and connect with us. So let's start with you, Ruby. How can our listeners connect with you?
So easiest thing to do is reach out to me, Ruby, R-U-B-Y, at Ruby Outdoors. Make sure you get the S on there, rubyoutdoors.com, Ruby at rubyoutdoors.com. You can also follow me on Instagram at Ruby Outdoors, or on Twitter, RubyLynn85.
Excellent. Rachel?
I would love for people to shoot me an email at kentr@girlguides.ca.
Excellent. And for me, it's cassie.bloy@stefanricard.ca. Go to the show notes to find how to spell all that. A big thank you to Ruby for spending time with us today. We absolutely love hearing from you and having these conversations with you. It's been, I've learned so much more today. I'm so excited to keep moving forward. We also want to thank Go Camp Pro for holding space for these conversations and providing us this opportunity. And to the team at ACA Illinois for their sponsorship and support of this idea. To our producer, Matt, for dealing with our internet connections every week and making sure we still sound great, even if our Wi-Fi is not so great. And to you, our listeners, your dedication and your continued listening keeps us moving forward. And Beyond Camp is part of the Go Camp Pro podcast network. Check out all other podcasts at gocamp.pro/podcasts. Go well and safely, friends. We'll see you next week.